Hello, everyone. Today we're going to talk about Ice, chapters 5 through 8. Last class, we discussed how this novel raises problems of perspective. If we're uncertain about what's real and what isn't as we read this book, it's because we are deeply immersed in the mind of the narrator. We see the young woman, the warden, the climate crisis, and everything else only as he sees them. He is telling us this story, and we do not know to what extent we can trust him. One of the things that gets emphasized in these 4 chapters is, I think, that storytelling is a form of control. Whenever you take things that have happened to you or in the world and tell them to someone else or simply to yourself as a story, this happened because that happened, I did this because I thought this, he did this because he felt that, you're trying to make the things that have happened make some kind of sense. But that also means that you are imposing your own ideas on the world. You're trying to put the things that have happened into an order that makes sense to you. You're trying to exert a kind of control over them, if only retrospectively. The narrator of Ice is living through chaotic personal and political events. He's trying to make sense of those events, to explain them to himself and to us as he tells this story. But because he is only one person, seeing the world from one perspective, like any of us, he doesn't actually know very much. So to explain all the things happening in his life and in the world, he needs to try to figure things out, to draw conclusions, to make assumptions. This can have very dangerous consequences, however. You'll probably have noticed that a number of times in this novel, the narrator recounts scenes in the young woman's life at which he was not present and about which it seems unlikely he ever could have gotten information. This happens again at the very start of chapter 5. The narrator sees from his window the young woman run into a forest and then loses sight of her. But he then tells us she was nervous in the forest, which always seemed full of menace. The crowding trees unnerved her, transformed themselves into black walls, shutting her in. It was late, after sunset. She had come too far and must hurry back. She looked about for the fjord, failed to see it, lost her bearings, and at once became really frightened, terrified of being overtaken by night in the dark forest. Fear was the climate she lived in. If she had ever known kindness, it would have been different. The trees seemed to obstruct her with deliberate malice. All her life she had thought of herself as a foredoomed victim, and now the forest had become the malign force that would destroy her. All the narrator saw was the young woman run into a forest. But then suddenly he's telling us that in the forest she was nervous, the dark trees frightened her, she got lost, and she needed help. Anyone who saw someone they were interested in disappear into a forest would try to figure out what that person was doing, why they were running away, but the way you explain it to yourself affects what you do next. Because the narrator tells himself the young woman is lost and afraid, that gives him the right, in his mind, to chase after her, which he does. Is she really feeling these things? Who knows? But the story the narrator tells about her allows him to continue to pursue her. The story the narrator is telling in this novel also allows him to blame the young woman. The narrator has this strange interest in a species of singing lemurs called the Indris. He appears to have studied them at one point in his life, likes to write about them, and fantasizes about dedicating the rest of his life to studying them. I derived great satisfaction from describing the gentle, mysterious, singing creatures, and seemed to grow more deeply involved with them as I wrote. With their enchanting, otherworld voices, their gay, affectionate, innocent ways, they had become for me symbols of life as it could be on Earth, if man's destructiveness, violence, and cruelty were eliminated. These animals, which sing for who knows what reason, feeling who knows what emotions, the narrator turns into characters in a story too. For him, these animals seem to be symbols of what life could be like if only human beings could overcome their flaws and weaknesses. Why can't the narrator spend his life studying them, living with them in a kind of natural utopia? He gives a reason. I tried to stop thinking about her, to fix my mind on those innocent, gentle creatures, their sweet, eerie singing. But she persistently distracted me with thoughts that were less than innocent. Something in her demanded victimization and terror, so she corrupted my dreams, led me into dark places I had no wish to explore. It was no longer clear to me which of us was the victim. Perhaps we were victims of one another. It troubles the narrator that his life is one of continual crisis and violence. He needs to explain, if only to himself, his failure to live peacefully with and like these singing lemurs he idolizes. And he explains his failure by saying this young woman demands to be victimized, and he wonders if he is her victim as much as she is his. Is he really her victim too? I doubt it. But by telling himself he is her victim, he can blame her for many of the things he does to her. He can portray himself as someone who might be hurting her, but who is trying not to hurt her. There's another aspect of storytelling that I think these chapters bring to light. If storytelling is a form of control, storytelling is also a failure to control. Despite the fact that only one character is telling us this story, and telling us how the world seems to him, you've probably noticed that the novel is also very fragmented. It's difficult to link certain parts of the novel together, as the narrator notes when he arrives in a country that has not yet been affected by the ice. A sunlit harbor was sliding past me, a busy town. I saw wide streets, well-dressed people, modern buildings, cars, yachts on the blue water. No snow, no ruins, no armed guards. It was a miracle, a flashback to something dreamed. Then another shock, the sensation of a violent awakening, as it dawned on me that this was the reality, and those other things the dream. All of a sudden, the life I had lately been living appeared unreal. It simply was not credible any longer. I felt a huge relief. It was like emerging into sunshine from a long, cold, black tunnel. I wanted to forget what had been just happening, to forget the girl and the senseless, frustrating pursuit I had been engaged in, and think only about the future. At the beginning of Chapter 7, all of the events of the previous 6 chapters seem unreal, not credible, like a dream. Are we finding out that there is no climate crisis, that the narrator is simply mentally unstable? I don't think so. I think the problem is this. The climate crisis has plunged certain parts of the planet into chaos and has not yet touched others. Different people on the planet are having wildly different experiences. One person cannot live all of those different experiences at once. One person cannot make sense of the fact that all of these different experiences are taking place at the same time. It's too much for one person to keep in mind. The narrator cannot take all of the things that are going on in the world and turn them into one smooth, coherent story. He tries. Sometimes he can do it for a few pages or chapters, but too much is happening too quickly to too many people. He can't order it all in his mind. From his one perspective, he can't explain it all, not even to himself. At one point in this section, when the narrator is being questioned during an investigation, an official says of him, "I wish to state that the witness is a psychopath, probably schizoid, and therefore not to be believed." The narrator is, without question, mentally unstable, but if his mind is fragmented, part of the reason is that the world around him is fragmented, and it's too much for any single mind to put it together. At the end of this section, when the narrator takes over the repair of a military transmitter, we see the limits of perspective one more time. The narrator recounts, "To pass the time and for want of something better to do, I organized the work on the transmitter. It was not far from completion, but the workers had grown discouraged and apathetic. I assembled them and spoke of the future. The belligerents would listen and be impressed by the impartial accuracy of our reports. The soundness of our arguments would convince them. Peace would be restored, danger of universal conflict averted. This was to be the final reward of their labors. In the meantime, I divided them into teams, arranged competitions, awarded prizes to those who worked best. Soon we were ready to start broadcasting. I recorded events on both sides with equal respect for truth, put out programs on world peace, urged an immediate ceasefire. The minister wrote, congratulating me on my work." For what seems like several months, the narrator is a leader to these soldiers and a model officer from the point of view of the minister. We know that this narrator is dangerous, violent, sadistic, and barely holding himself together. But from the perspectives of the soldiers under him and the minister over him, and the stories they tell about him, he is, for a while at least, a hero.